I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Carroll. I'm the Executive Director at Advanced Transit, and I'm so excited that you all are here today to learn about some big changes that we're proposing, some of which we plan to start as early as fall of this year. So there's also some longer term stuff that's more conceptual, and we're excited to hear your questions about it, your feedback, and just let us know what you think about these proposals so that as we move forward with them, we're making sure that we are being responsive to our riders' needs. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Steve Falbel, who's our planner and has been working on this process now since summer of last year. And he has a microphone on his lapel, so he won't have to hold the silly non-amplifying microphone. I'm going to put that to the side. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adams, and thanks everyone for coming. I assume you all have received or saw the self-guided tour handout, and many of you just arrived, so you haven't had a chance to look at the boards. So a lot of what I'm going to say in the presentation is the same as what's in that self-guided tour, and the slides here are the same as what's posted around the room. This will be up until 1:30, so after the presentation, you're welcome to take as much time as you want to read what's in the handout, look at the maps, put your comments, vote between the two Saturday alternatives there, and we'll also be around to answer any additional questions you may have at that point. So this presentation is about 20 slides or so. It'll probably take about half an hour. Again, happy to answer questions as we go through or at the end. So just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about, just explain what the Transit Development Plan is and a little bit about the process. Then there's a quick summary of the system and needs analysis that was done last fall. Then there's a section on the short-term recommendations for this year and next year, and then a section on the longer-term recommendations from 2025 forward for the next several years, and then finally what the next steps are in the process. So what is the TDP? So it's a plan that's updated every 5 years, and it guides the development of advanced transit. AT has done these plans for nearly 20 years, pretty much on a 5-year cycle, and has over time implemented recommendations from these plans to improve and expand the system. So it includes both short-term tweaks to the system, which might mean changing the schedule a little bit or changing a bus stop here and there. And it also lays out longer-term priorities, which could include new routes and other types of service enhancements. The process is based on a lot of data collection and analysis. Ridership counts are taken on an ongoing basis. If you've been on a bus, you'll see a driver sort of poking a tablet to record when you got on and when you got off. So we have basically every passenger boarding and alighting in the system. And there was also a system-wide passenger survey last October that we got several hundred responses from that to get more information on why people ride, where they go, which routes they ride, and other information. And all of that was wrapped up into this system analysis that was done last fall. The process also includes public outreach, and that's what we're doing today. We also had some public workshops last fall to collect information on needs. And there's also meetings with key stakeholders. And in this region, the two key stakeholders are the hospital and Dartmouth College, the biggest employers, among the biggest employers in New Hampshire, certainly the largest employers in this region. So we meet with them separately to get their comments and feedback on the plan, because they help fund the system as well. They contribute to advanced transit's service. So just a quick overview of recent ridership trends. The peak ridership for advanced transit was actually in 2016. And then you can see between 2017 and 2019, it was pretty stable. Maybe a little decline here, a little rise there. But then, of course, in fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, everything fell off the table because of the pandemic. And the pit was in fiscal 21. That's that's July 1st of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. That's the fiscal year. But then in fiscal 22 and currently partway through fiscal 23, you can see things on the upswing again, especially the blue route. You can see has jumped quite a bit. This has to do with new development of housing along Mount Support Road and increased ridership other places on the blue route. Other routes are sort of slowly recovering the riders that they lost due to the pandemic. The needs analysis, if we try to boil it down to just a few items here, these are some of the important issues to be addressed in the route planning phase, which is what we're looking at now. Some unmet needs, weekend service and weekday evening service. So through many generations of surveys of passengers, when we ask, what do you need that you're not getting from the system? Number one was Saturday service. Number two was later service in the evening, because most routes shut down at 6:30 or 7. They say, well, we need service later than that. So those were always number one and number two in terms of the needs. And then there's some geographic gaps. It's like Alice Peck Day Hospital, we can't get there on a bus route, or Centera, we can't get there on a bus route, and places like that. Another issue was poor performance. So most of AT's routes operate very efficiently and well, but you can see here that at the bottom, basically on the zero line here, is the yellow route. It carries very few passengers. And the brown route is the next lowest route. It's historically been one of the poorer performers. So those are the two routes that we looked at to say, what can we do with these routes to help improve their performance and make it more attractive to riders? And then the third large issue is responding to development and improving levels of service on routes that have not quite made it there yet. So the big improvement about a year ago was increasing service on the blue route, which used to run every half hour and had 15-minute service on the middle segment. But as of a year ago, it had 15-minute service all day for the entire route. And that was a big reason that you saw that jump in ridership on the blue route. Other routes were not there yet. Orange route still runs only once an hour for the entire length. It has additional service in White River Junction in peak periods only. And the red route in the early morning only runs once an hour as well. It doesn't kick into half-hour service until 8:45. So looking at ways to improve service on at least those two routes, if not others. So just a quick overview of the short-term changes that we're proposing here and that are covered on all these boards. Expanded weekday evening service, restructured yellow route, including service to Sachem Village, service on Saturdays, reconfigured Canaan Enfield service, which I'll explain in a bit, and a replacement of evening service on the Dartmouth-Hanover shuttle after 7 p.m. So I'll explain what each of those things are. And these short-term changes may happen as soon as this fall. Funding is in place for a number of these, and as much as can be done will be done within the next year or so. So the weekday evening service expansions, basically to take the four main routes, not including the brown and the yellow, and run them 2 hours later than what they run now. So the blue route currently runs until about 7, extend it to 9. The other routes run until 6:30, extend them until 8:30. This would also include ADA paratransit service that would be extended for the same hours as the bus routes. As I said before, this is one of the top 2 requests from riders is to run these services later. It would help nurses at the hospital. It help a lot of people, who just have to finish their activity or eat dinner or do something, and 6:30 is just too early for a service to end for them. So that's the first short-term change. The second one is the yellow route. As we saw before in the ridership graph, the yellow route as it exists currently carries very few people. It runs, for those of you not familiar with it, it serves the Upper Valley Aquatic Center. It serves Bugby Street, the Brookview Apartments, and Sterling Springs Drive, and every other trip it goes on the orange route through White River Junction. But the yellow route on its own carries, a dozen people a day or something like that. It's just very, very low ridership. So we're proposing to restructure it to make it much more attractive. So in White River Junction, it would still cover the Upper Valley Aquatic Center, it would cover the Gilman Center, which is not covered by the regular orange route. But then instead of doing this loop through here, it would essentially do what the orange route does, go up Route 10 to Hanover, but it would also have a diversion to Sachem Village, because Sachem Village is hundreds of units of housing for graduate students and others associated with Dartmouth, who right now have to walk about, not quite a half mile, but a decent distance out to Route 10 to catch the bus, the Orange Route bus, which runs once an hour. So this would be service every 30, the service here would be every 30 minutes. The direct service to Sachem Village would be once an hour, but it would be much more convenient for them and provide a direct connection to the Dartmouth campus, which is, what the people who live there, that's mainly where they need to go. So in combination with the Orange Route, that would essentially give the Orange Route 30-minute service, because this mostly overlaps with what the Orange Route does. So instead of the Orange Route running once an hour, you'd essentially have 30-minute service on that, which is a significant improvement. So Saturday service, like weekday evening, this is one of the top requests from riders. So what we're proposing is essentially hourly bus service from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. There would be 3 routes to cover most of the service area. It wouldn't cover the entire service area, but it would do most of it in all of the most popular places. On the New Hampshire side, there'd be a combination of the blue and red routes. On those maps, it's shown there as the purple route. And we'll see a map here in a second. It would include a short diversion to Centera, to the food co-op store there, since that's likely to be a popular destination on Saturdays. There'd be a green route between Hanover and West Leb. There'd be also service in White River Junction. And it would include direct service to Sachem Village. So there are 2 alternative route structures, and this is one of the main things we want feedback on today, is which of these seem preferable to you. So this map, or this slide, shows both route structures. On the left is what we're calling alternative 1. On the right is alternative 2. So I'll highlight the differences between them. So alternative 1 has those 3 routes, the combination of the blue and red here. It has the green route, which gets extended to Sachem Village. So starts there, goes through Hanover, diverts to Norwich, comes down via the normal green route, does not go to Hartford Village, but then goes to Hilton Library, and then continues down to the plazas and circulates through the plazas like the red route does today. And then the third route would cover basically Hartford Village and White River Junction, circulate through there, and then also do a loop through the plazas. So you have 3 routes. It includes Norwich Village. It's somewhat different from weekday service, because this is not what the weekday service looks like. But the big advantage of it is it gives a 1-seat ride to everybody who wants to go shopping down at the plaza. So no matter which route you get on, you don't have to transfer. You just ride that bus, go shopping, go home again. The other structure here, alternative 2, is much more similar to what the weekday service looks like. So again, it has the combination of the blue and red routes. Those 2 are exactly the same in the 2 maps. But it would have the new yellow route, as I just described, which would serve Sachem Village, and would have the green route pretty much as it runs today, not including Norwich, but it would include Hartford Junction, and there would still be a major transfer point here at Hilton Library. So if you're on the yellow route or the green route and you wanted to go shopping, you'd have to transfer at Hilton Library to what's shown here as the purple route. It's essentially the red route. So that's the big difference. Is this looks much more like the weekday service. So it's maybe easier for customers they don't have to think about a different route structure. But this is more convenient in that it doesn't require anyone to transfer, at least to get to the shopping areas. And one thing also to keep in mind is right now transfers at Hilton Library are pretty easy to do because you have a lot of buses coming together at once. But on Saturday, since it would only run once per hour, they wouldn't all be able to come together at the same time. There may be waits of like half an hour or 40 minutes or something. We haven't worked out the schedule yet, but there may be some long waits there depending on exactly how you want to go from one location to another. So that's the main question we have before you. Do you think it makes sense to do this structure, which is different from weekday, but 1-seat rides, or this structure, which is very similar to weekday, but you'd have to transfer at Hilton Library? So you can think about that, and there's a little board over there. You can use a sticky dot and vote for which one you think is the better idea. Another short-term solution or another short-term option being considered is to reconfigure Canaan and Enfield service. So for those of you who are familiar with it, right now certain Blue Route trips go out to Canaan and Enfield. They go, one of them bypasses Lebanon City Hall, but the others go through Lebanon, and then they turn into a blue bus, essentially, and do the regular Blue Route on Mount Support Road to the hospital and to Hanover. So the concept here is that instead of thinking of it as part of the Blue Route, is to have it just be its own shuttle, which runs between Lebanon City Hall through Enfield to Canaan and back and forth. And there are a few reasons to do that. One is it simplifies the Blue Route schedule rather than having the Blue Route start in lots of different places. It would allow you to run probably 4 trips per peak period instead of 3. Right now, the Blue Route runs 3 trips in the morning and 3 trips in the afternoon. For the same money or even less money, you could run 4 trips in the morning and the afternoon, so a little bit better service. Another reason that it's part of the Blue Route, or historically part of the Blue Route, is that the assumption was the commuters on that route were mainly headed to the hospital or Dartmouth. But based on the survey data, we found that about half of them have destinations on the red route. So there are a lot of them are already transferring at Lebanon City Hall to get to the red route, or just working in downtown Lebanon or something. So being connected to the Blue Route is not important for about half the passengers. So that's the trade-off there. Do we force some people to transfer to the Blue Route at Lebanon City Hall for the sake of having more service out to Canaan and Enfield and maybe saving a little bit money, or do we leave it as it is? So that's the question there. And then the last of the short-term changes is to take the Dartmouth-Hanover shuttle. Right now it runs very frequently in the morning and the afternoon between Thompson Arena and Tuck and Vale, but in the evening it runs sort of more broadly. It goes to Sachem Village, it goes various other places to cover for the fact that the regular bus routes don't run. So if we're extending regular bus routes until 8:30 or 9, then there's really no reason to run this evening version of the Dartmouth shuttle because it'll be covered by the other routes. So basically taking that out of service and replacing it with regular bus route service. So that's the short-term recommendations. I'll stop there for a second to see if there are any questions on that before we go into the longer term. Yes?
Hi.
Sorry, let's get the microphone for you.
It won't make your voice any louder, but the folks who are watching the video will be able to hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm in favor of weekend service. However, the routes that you're proposing don't appear to service Lime Road. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's nothing north of the campus. That's correct.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if in the future there'll be any discussion of putting service in for Lime Road?
I would say definitely yes, there would be. It also has to do with the micro transit service that we're going to talk about later. Mm-hmm. But certainly as more housing gets built by Dartmouth, the North Campus, and maybe Rivercrest, and when there's more demand there, mm-hmm. that would be a stronger justification for adding Saturday service to that leg of the system. Right now there's not a huge amount of demand up there, but I would say definitely as demand develops, and if micro transit service gets in there, then that would be incorporated into the system.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other short-term questions? Yes.
On that first slide about, about short-term things, there was something about how that's where you look at the bus stops and their locations. And I was unaware of the survey last fall. I wish I had known about it.
It was just one. If you didn't happen to be on the bus that one day, you would have missed it. So,
but what is the procedure to? Who do you address at Advanced Transit to maybe ask about a bus stop?
That's a good question. I'll sort of put that to Trish and Adams. What the best way to register a comment is.
So do you have one in particular that you're concerned about, or a spot that you...
Yes, the blue stop by the high school.
Okay. In Hanover?
Yes.
Yeah. So we get comments about our bus stops pretty frequently. And The easiest thing to do is to just call in to the phone number, and our dispatcher will pick up and be able to route you to our operations team. But we also get, people will reach out and they want to put in a shelter or just other ideas, and we're always looking for that kind of feedback and opportunities for partnership. I would say calling is probably the best way to, yeah.
I do have one more question. On the Blue Route extension or changing it between Lebanon and Canaan, you said that might be able to add additional routes. Would there be any opportunity for like a midday bus?
That certainly is possible. I don't think that would be a short-term solution, and it's just a question of money ultimately. Mm-hmm. But if it's running as its own shuttle, it's easier to change the service level and just say, okay, well, we'll just send a midday trip out there. That's certainly possible.
Because I lived out that way for a long time, and the bus is, it's wonderful in every way, except if you ride the bus in and don't have a ride back, you have to wait all day.
Till the end of the day, yeah.
So it can make for a long day at the hospital.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Okay, let's talk about some longer-term changes. Improved red route service, a restructuring the brown route, a restructuring the green route, system-wide microtransit, which we'll spend a bit of time on for those of you who are not familiar with what microtransit is. And then restructured, actually, we don't have that's a mistake. There's nothing on the restructured Dartmouth-Hanover shuttle because we talked about that already. Expanded service on the red route. As I mentioned at the beginning, early morning service on the red route only runs every hour. It would be relatively simple to bring a second bus route instead of starting at 8:45 to start it at 6:45 in the morning, and that way you have half-hour service all day. And that's, again, just a question of having some funding available. That could be done, a year or two from now. It's relatively simple. But the red route is the second highest ridership route in the system and probably would justify a higher level of service overall, similar to what we now have on the blue route. So the strategy would be a couple of years down the road, seek additional funding to improve service to every 15 minutes or every 20 minutes or something better than what it is now on the red route to run at least through most of the day because we expect demand to continue to grow on that route. So that's no real changes to the red route in terms of where it goes, but just improving the level of service on it so that there's more frequent buses. So the brown route, as I mentioned at the beginning, is one of the poorest performing routes. And right now it runs every 40 minutes, which is not really in sync with the rest of the system. And it has these two legs, one in Norwich and one on Lime Road, which don't have a lot to do with each other. They were sort of like the leftovers in the system. It's like, okay, well, we'll just connect them together. And it's never really made sense as a route. We tried to think about what's a better way to serve those markets. So this brown route you can see it's a much more linear service, and it would originate at Sachem Village, would run through Hanover, would serve Tuck Mall to get directly to the Tuck School, and then run up Lime Road as the brown route does today, ending at Kendall. This would start out at running every 30 minutes, which is better than the existing brown route, which runs every 40 minutes, and it would give a higher level of service to Sachem Village, because the current proposal for Sachem Village is the once every hour service on that new yellow route. So when this comes into place, that yellow route would be taken out of Sachem Village, stay on Route 10. This route would go there instead, but run twice as frequently, so that people in Sachem Village would have better service. This is a couple of years down the road. Dartmouth is in the process of building new housing on the north side of the campus. They're talking about redevelopment of Rivercrest, which is next door to that, additional housing. That'll create more demand on the north side. And as those things come online, it's possible to ramp up the level of service on this route. But we think this is a better use of the resources than the existing brown route. That should be thought of as a package with restructured green route because, if we take the brown route out of Norwich, then we have to put something else in Norwich in its stead. So the plan here is to take, right now there are 2 buses on the green route that run together every half hour. And right now, one of them runs out to Hartford Village and the next one doesn't. And they sort of alternate. So Hartford Village has service every hour, but this part of the route has service every half hour. So we're just sort of expanding on that concept and have 2 versions of the green route, which you can think of as Green 1 and Green 2, where Green 1 does pretty much what it does today, but would go to Hartford Village on each trip once an hour. And Green 2 would include a diversion to Norwich Village, turning around at Hazen Street and serving Dan and Witts, would follow down here, would not go to Hartford Village, but would go straight to Kilton Library. So this would run once an hour, this would run once an hour. Together, this corridor has service every 30 minutes. Norwich Village gets service every hour. Hartford Village gets service every hour. That's how it would work together. So yes, this is not as great service for Norwich Village as they have to do every 40 minutes, but there's only about 15 people all day who board the bus up here, so it's not a lot of people. And every service every 60 minutes is enough to accommodate that demand. So that's that's the concept of a restructured green service. And the other thing that is part of this overall package is this thing called microtransit, because we will, for Norwich, be breaking that link between Norwich and Lime Road. And there are a few people. There's some kids in Norwich who go to the middle school on Lime Road, and they would have to transfer now where they don't currently. And there's some people who work at Carroll. It's not a large number of people. We're talking about 2 or 3 people. But if we had microtransit service in place, people would be able to still have those connections door to door. So let's explain what microtransit service is for those of you not familiar with it. It's a developing mode of public transit service, and it's enabled by smartphone technology. And it's an on-demand service that's similar to Uber and Lyft. For those of you who ever have taken a Uber or Lyft ride, in a metro area, where basically you have a smartphone app, you say, here I am, I want to go someplace else, book a ride, and the app tells you, a car will be there in 20 minutes to pick you up, and here's what the fare is, and then you say, okay, you book the ride and you pay for it. Microtransit works in a similar way to that. It's shared ride, it's not like a taxi, so there may be other people who get on and off the bus while you're on it, and it wouldn't be a bus, it would be a van, a smaller vehicle. There are pilot projects in Vermont currently. Some of them are running, some of them are starting. For 2 years now, there's been a pilot project in Montpelier and Berlin called My Ride by GMT. They have 3 vans in service there. I helped design that for them, and they have a lot of experience with that. And then one just opened in January in Windsor called MicroMoo. That's by the Mover, and that's only 1 van in service. Windsor did not have any public transit service prior to that. So, and Windsor is a pretty small place, so they just have 1 van running around there. And there are other pilot projects that are soon to launch in Bennington, Morrisville, and Middlebury. VTrans, the State Agency of Transportation, has been promoting microtransit pilot projects all over the state. And there were 14 feasibility studies done over the last year or 2. And so these pilot projects are going to be rolling out over the next year to test out microtransit service. In some cases, they replace fixed route buses. And in some cases, like I said in Windsor, they're just in new territory with no prior transit. They're currently operated with cutaway vans, similar to what you see around here, the Access AT vans. Those are called cutaways. But they're likely best operated with some smaller vehicles like Sprinter vans, which are like 8-passenger or 12-passenger vans, or even SUVs in some case. All over the world, there's all different types of microtransit vehicles out there. Just to give you an idea of how it works, this is sort of an example of if you had a smartphone, this is how it would work. Now, these are screenshots from Manhattan, so this is, we don't have a street network like that anywhere in Vermont. But, you start the app, you say, here I am, it tells you you're at this intersection, it asks you how many passengers, then you drag the map to say, okay, I want to go here, and then it offers you a ride. It says, okay, well, we can give you a ride, in this case, in 6 minutes for $7, and these are just examples, this is not how it would work here, and then you say, book the ride, and it says, okay, well, here's your van or your car, whatever, is this license plate, it'll be here in a certain number of minutes, and then you get on there and you go to your destination. So that's how it works via smartphone. All of the microtransit systems in Vermont also have the option just to call in to a regular call center, because obviously not everyone has smartphones. So you can reserve a ride in the same way by just talking to someone rather than pushing buttons on a smartphone. So how would this work in the Upper Valley? So what's proposed here and mapped out over here is a system-wide microtransit service, which for now I'm calling AT Flex. So right now, AT operates Access AT for people with disabilities. It's ADA complementary paratransit. And that ADA service would be subsumed into this general public microtransit service. So anyone with a disability would ride AT Flex instead of the current Access AT. An advantage of this microtransit service is it would expand coverage to all areas in the region that are not covered by existing bus routes. And some of the most important ones are APD Hospital, the Route 120 corridor, Etna Road, Centera. These are places that have development but are not on an existing bus route and don't quite have enough development to justify a whole new bus route on their own, but have enough demand that a demand response service like this could accommodate it and generate some ridership from it. So microtransit would allow for more one-seat rides. I gave the example before of the Blue Route, so it would maintain that Norwich to Lime Road connection. It could potentially have a fare for people who are not eligible for ADA paratransit. And the theory of that is that you could think of it, since it's a door-to-door service, that it's sort of like a premium service. And so therefore a fare of, say, $2 or something would make sense for somebody who doesn't have to walk out to a bus route and wait for a bus, that they get their service on demand. It also, charging a fare, operationally discourages people from no-shows and late cancellations. And this is the experience in Montpelier, where it's been fare-free at the beginning, and they have a significant problem. There's like 20% of trips where people who just booked, well, I'm not sure when I'm going to go, I'm just going to book 4 trips. And they only show up for one of them. But the bus still shows up there, waiting for them, and sits there for 5 minutes, and it's just a waste of resources. So if you charge a fare, that discourages people from doing that, from gaming the system or just doing these no-shows. So that's why it's important to have a fare for operational reasons. Just to note that the current ADA service typically has 2 vans on the street at any one time, and it picks up about 20 to 25 people on a given day. So if we had this system-wide microtransit, we would have more vans out there, maybe 6, maybe 8. We haven't decided exactly, and it can be scaled up or down pretty easily depending on what the demand is. But we'd expect a lot more riders with that sort of service. All the ADA riders would be there, plus they would probably take more trips, because right now they have to call a day in advance to get a trip, and under the new system they could say, I want a trip in half an hour. That's a lot more convenient. So we'd expect demand to go up across the board, and so we'd have more vehicles on the street to accommodate that. So that summarizes all of the proposals in the study. So just to summarize what the next steps are, we're going to have those focus group meetings with Dartmouth College and Dartmouth Health to discuss these ideas with them directly. I'll have to do some more detailed ridership and cost analysis so that the agency knows exactly how much it's going to cost to operate these things. That goes into an overall financial plan to say, if you implement this service in year 2, then it would cost this, and so on and so forth for budgeting purposes going out. This will all get written up into a final report, likely sometime over the summer. And then start implementation in the fall with some of these short-term changes that you see around the room and that we discussed. So here's my contact information. Comments are encouraged. You all should have a comment form as part of your packet, so we encourage you to write down your thoughts and vote. There's also, you can see the website, advancedtransit.com/plan has more information on the TDP, and you can always submit comments through that as well. So anyway, that's the slideshow. Happy to take more questions if anyone has it. Adams is armed with the microphone, so yes.
Thank you. Ian Sim, I'm a member of the Hanover Planning Board, so I'm delighted to hear that Advanced Transit is in discussion with the college about the future student housing which has been proposed for Lime Road there. I assume you're looking at opportunities for synergy between Advanced Transit and Dartmouth itself. The neighborhood has expressed a lot of concern about the extra traffic that might be generated by shuttles between the Lime Road 400 student apartments and downtown Hanover. So I wondered if you could comment on that, and I have a couple of other questions as well.
Sure. I mean, Dartmouth has been doing its own study, looking at its own internal shuttle system, and there's been communication between Dartmouth and AT on that and coordinating that, because no one wants a lot of duplication of service. So none of those plans are set in stone. Dartmouth is very much supportive of these plans thus far. I mean, we're going to talk to them more directly about it. They're definitely supporting the Saturday service because they realize that's a big hole in what is currently offered in the region. But AT will continue to work with Dartmouth on an ongoing basis to coordinate things and make the most efficient use of everyone's resources.
Right. So again, in the longer term, looking at when the Lime Road housing might come into effect, I wonder if thought has been given maybe to, and this concerns the Brown route, which is apparently at the moment not very efficient, whether or not that should become actually part of the Blue route, so that it would take students, for example, from the accommodation, take them out east along to where near some of the athletics facilities are, on North Park Street, Lebanon Street intersection there, rather than having them traveling on the Brown route, having to change at Vale and then head out east to the athletic facilities. If there was a single shot ride, that might be more efficient.
We didn't look at that specifically. I would say that that's probably enough years out that the next TDP would think about that, because the Blue route right now has service every 15 minutes. And that level of service cannot be justified on Lime Road, at least for the next few years until quite a bit more housing is developed there. But I would say that could be a thought for the longer term, 4 or 5 years out from now and beyond.
Well, you certainly have potentially 400 students if that project that the college is proposing goes ahead. Okay, so the last thing is perhaps more short term about the Brown route. At the north end of it, it's great for people at Kendall Senior Living, understood, but for anybody else living north of Kendall, they have no way to access the Brown route because there's nowhere where you can legally park and ride, except until you get all the way up into Lyme, where there is the New Hampshire park and ride there. Any thoughts about extending the Brown route up to Lyme, and thoughts about how you can integrate the bus routes with park and rides? I'll give you my personal example. I happen to live at the top end of Hanover Centre Road. If I wanted to get Advanced Transit into Hanover and park legally my car, I would have to drive to Lebanon and then get a bus from Lebanon into Hanover, which is not very efficient, not very attractive. So we need to have better integration of transit, perhaps with park and ride going forward.
I know that over the years there have been some discussions about parking capacity at the athletic fields. Nothing's happened on that yet, but I wouldn't consider that off the table. We have not looked at extending the Brown route past Kendall because I believe there's quite a bit of blank space before you get to the next destination in Lyme. But that could be considered, but I wouldn't consider that a short-term option. I think a park and ride option at that end of the route would be more efficient. Did you have a thought
I'll just
on
add to that to say that so we're approaching our 40th year of service, and for quite a portion of that time, we did have service directly to Lyme, and it was discontinued, and in part because the distance and the time involved means you're running much less frequent service. It would be closer to what our current Enfield and Canaan service is, and I think it wasn't possible to run midday trips, and as a result, it was pretty low ridership. So it was, it's one of those trade-offs. If we keep a more compact area, we're able to have more frequency, and the services become more appealing and more flexible for people. As we expand out to cover more of the region, we have to either come up with a lot more resources to operate the same levels of frequency, or reduce frequencies to the point that you're only getting 3 or 4 trips a day as opposed to every 30 minutes or every hour. So that's the planning challenge that we come up against.
Yeah. I mean, Canaan and Enfield as well lost about half the riders in the pandemic, and it has not come back. The ridership out there is quite a bit lower than it used to be. So I would find it hard to justify replicating that to new areas at this point until there's demonstrated demand that people want these longer distance commuter type services, because that's less popular than it used to be before the pandemic. More remote workers, issues like that.
Is the microtransit proposal on the table for the fall, or is that off in the future?
That, I believe, is a longer term issue. There's a lot more details to be worked out about. There's a lot of education to work out about that, and there's no funding available for right now. So I think the plan is for that to be a little bit longer term.
I would also say on that, there's also a great opportunity now to learn from the other communities in Vermont that are a little bit further ahead than we are. And so by the time that we are ready to roll it out, we'll have the advantage of being able to see what worked and what didn't work when we do ours. So,
hi, thanks. 2 comments. I echo what Mr. Sims said about the park and ride. And I used to live about a mile from in town Hanover, but a mile from any bus service, because I was in a residential area, and you really don't go through residential areas. But park and ride, yeah, I completely support that as well, too. My other question is, I tend to ride on non-peak times, just for fun, and or what you might call fun. And I noticed that the size of the bus is the same as what I assume you're driving during peak times. I'm sure there's limitations to switching vehicles during non-peak times, but have you ever explored that idea?
It's a very common question, because it's like, why are you running this 35-foot bus when there's only 5 or 6 people on it? There are a few reasons. The majority of the cost of the service is the driver, not the vehicle. So it wouldn't save a huge amount of money to be operating a smaller vehicle, but it would cost a huge amount of money to have 2 separate fleets of big buses for peak periods and small buses for midday, and to have to swap them all out. So that's the reason that even though the bus is too big for midday demand, it's still the most cost-effective approach to operating the service, rather than having 2 entirely separate fleets to operate the service over the course of the day.
thank you for the questions. I'm so glad that you guys are asking these.
Well, it's less of a question, but more a devil's advocacy. I feel like in a lot of areas, in particular the Upper Valley, I would generally be opposed to park and rides. I think that what Adams had just pointed out about the trade-off of trying to disperse a fixed route bus network into very low density areas where the ridership cannot support the frequency is far more detrimental than the few people that it would pick up. And in general, I would say around transit stops, parking is probably not a very good use of the land. a place that has access to a fixed route bus that comes frequently is a perfect place to put buildings where people can live or work or shop or do other sorts of activities, whereas parking can pretty much only be used for parking. I would say for people that do, who have the option to drive, we already spend billions of dollars on automobile infrastructure to get people around. And so if you choose to live that far out and are of the means to drive, then there's your solution. Obviously, that won't work for everyone. So I think microtransit could be a really interesting way to fill that gap for those that live far away but don't really have a choice to come in closer. So not really a question, but
Let's hear it for new urbanism, yes.
Oh, thank you. To sort of tag on to this gentleman's point, do public transportation systems ever participate in organizing rideshare programs?
Yes, definitely. I mean, in Vermont, there's a statewide rideshare program called Go Vermont. New Hampshire doesn't have exactly the same thing, but there are organizations that help organize carpools and other ride sharing. And it depends on the transit agency how actively they participate in themselves. Some of them are pretty active participants and encourage people to do that. But like I said, in Vermont, it's really a statewide initiative to coordinate that service.
Thank you.
And one other thing to notice, depending on the type of trip, there may actually be a service or who the rider is in a lot of cases, like the Upper Valley Senior Citizens Council Center, gosh, I always get that wrong, has a transportation service for seniors that's, I know they need more drivers, but it's available, for on-demand trips. And then some of the other agencies like Tri-Valley Transit and operate on-demand trips for, non-emergency medical trips and things like that. So sometimes there is an option, even though it's not provided by AT. And we did actually used to have a rideshare program as well, but it didn't get a lot of utilization from what I understand. I'm new enough here that I don't know the full details on it, but we don't offer that anymore.
Hi, just quick comments. First, I think this is fantastic. I think it seems well researched and expanding the time of day and the efficiency of where you're going when seems like all good. The other thing is just a general comment about just me as a user. I've used Advanced Transit a lot, mainly the Blue. I check the schedule every single time because I don't have it memorized. So I guess just specific to the alternatives for the Sunday routes, I think the convenience, in my opinion, is better than the consistency. I think it's just a matter of, putting up a times table and having that be consistently updated on the website or whatever.
Great.
That's my opinion.
Thank you. We have about 10 or 15 minutes left in the open house. We encourage you to put in your votes for the Saturday service, to look at the other boards. I don't know if we need to shut down exactly at 1:30. I guess if people want to hang out a little longer, that's okay. But we'll all be around to answer any additional questions you have. So thank you very much for your attention.
I was going to ask a question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I was wondering, to see if I can get me on the video, about the new brown line and yellow line have a lot of overlap. And I was wondering if there's ideas about just combining those into one line, and you'd put all those buses into one line too. So I imagine the frequency would be about the same, but I'm not sure if that was something that got looked at.
When the new brown line comes online, then the yellow route would no longer go to Sachem Village, so we'd eliminate that duplication. So there would still be duplication between Gould Road and downtown Hanover. And there's not a lot of way to avoid that. But they really do different things. The yellow route really is a connection from Kilton up to Hanover. And the brown route has both the Sachem Village to Hanover, but also the north side service. To say, well, we should just take the yellow route and have it does what it does now and extend it out all the way. You could do that, but then you run into what's the cycle time problem, which is you would no longer be able to run that in 1 hour. It would take about an hour and a half, which turns it into an awkward cycle time because it's getting a little technical here. Because you want to have bus routes that ideally that run sort of neatly within an hour. And that way it's easy to adjust service to run every half hour, every 20 minutes, or every 15 minutes. If you have a 90-minute cycle time, then if you put 2 buses on it, then they run every 45 minutes, which is awkward. You have to have 3 buses to run every 30. It gets a little technical, but there are certain limits into how you design a bus route to have it to run efficiently and to be coordinated with other services.
I see.
Everybody has their own wish lists for improvements. But it just seems to me that we should all be celebrating enhancements to public transit no matter where in the world, even if they don't benefit each person personally. But especially for the non-drivers, whatever there is an improvement. So thank you.
Thanks. So anyway, feel free to wander about and vote and ask any other questions you have individually. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for